What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the TCL 40XL. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, before we actually get to the phone itself, let's take a look at what comes in the box. So in here, it's pretty simple. We got the quick start guide, we get a SIM card removal tool, a charging cable, and a USB wall adapter. But moving on to the phone itself, with the TCL 40XL, we're getting a really large 6.75-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 260, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in general, for a really affordable entry-level phone, at full price, this phone is going for around $118, so definitely not an expensive phone at all. So considering that, the display is okay. Just like the predecessor, the TCL 30XL, unfortunately we are still getting only a 720p resolution, which again, considering this is more of an affordable phone, I do understand. But at the same time, at this point in 2023, I feel like having a 1080p resolution is more of a standard. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, consuming a lot of content, maybe doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, then in that case you might want to spend a bit more and get a phone that has a better display than this. But overall, for what it is, things do still look pretty decent. And also keep in mind, with the 90Hz refresh rate, this won't make a huge difference, but with this kind of refresh rate versus, say, a standard 60Hz display, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium to use. So while this definitely doesn't make up for not having a 1080p display, it still does make things feel a little bit nicer, so definitely good to see there. In addition to this, at 6.75 inches, the display is really large, so if you're doing stuff like maybe reading or browsing the web, for example, things on the phone will be pretty easy to see. The only other thing I do want to point out here when it comes to the display is that with this phone, despite the image being decently bright and, again, in general, looking pretty good for what it is, the viewing angles are really not the best. So if you're outside a lot, especially in direct sunlight, keep in mind that this is not going to be the most pleasant experience. But aside from this, if you're in a normal indoor setting, things will be at least okay. Now for storage, with the TCL 40XL, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and for a phone in this price range, this is honestly really impressive. Now keep in mind, there is another version that has 128, which honestly, even that is a lot of storage for a phone like this. But if you do want a ton of storage, then definitely get the higher version, because for a phone you can get for well under $200, 256GB is quite a bit. So no matter what you're doing with your phone, you're most likely not going to have to worry about running out of space. So definitely great to see. For security features, this phone does have Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So of course, definitely a great spot for a fingerprint scanner, but let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the TCL 40XL up front, we got a kind of water drop notch design for the selfie camera. Definitely not as distracting as a normal water drop notch. I want to say most phones in this price range have it taking up like half the bezel here. But despite not being as good as a hole punch, in the context of the rest of the phone, it still does look decently clean, so I really don't have any complaints. Now this camera is 8 megapixels, then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So unfortunately no ultra wide camera here, but to be fair, there are lots of phones in this price range and even quite a bit more expensive that for whatever reason still don't have ultra wide cameras, which is honestly too bad. You would think at this point in 2023, an ultra wide camera would be pretty much a standard, but unfortunately that's not the case. So despite it being disappointing that this phone doesn't have one, I'm at least not really that surprised. But as for everything else, with the 50 megapixel main camera, I am expecting good photo quality here. And if the TCL 30XL is anything to go off of, I would say if you're looking for a more affordable phone like this, and maybe you're not a super heavy camera user, but you still want to be able to take a nice photo every now and then. While I haven't actually used the camera yet, considering this is a first impressions video, I am expecting it to be a pretty good choice. And then also keep in mind for video, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K, but honestly in this price range, no phone can actually record 4K videos anyway, so definitely not a big deal. Now for the RAM and processor, with the TCL 40XL, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor, so definitely a pretty common processor for more more entry-level phones like this. And also keep in mind there is another variant that only has 4GB of RAM, but this phone in my hand does have 6GB. Now in general, when it comes to overall performance, I feel like whether or not this phone is really going to be good enough definitely depends on your expectations. Because on one hand, if you're coming from maybe an older but higher end phone, then yeah, going to a phone like this is probably going to be a pretty big downgrade. Because in general, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially doing more demanding activities, this is really not a fast phone. But on the other hand, if you're a more casual light user and you're not really doing that demanding of activities, maybe you're doing stuff like watching YouTube videos, playing Angry Birds or something like that, and then browsing the web, using social media, more simple things, for that sort of activity, despite again definitely not being the fastest phone out there, I do think it will at least get the job done. And then of course, in case you didn't know, this is not a 5G phone, so if you are looking for 5G connectivity, then you will want to get something else. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device. Because of course, depending on what you're coming from, again it may be a huge downgrade, or maybe you're coming from an older, lower-end phone that's just super slow overall, then in that case, the TCL 40XL might actually be an upgrade. So again, it really just depends. But like I said before, for a more casual light user, despite not really being anything special, I do think for more basic activities, this phone's performance should be at least good enough. Now for the battery, the TCL 40XL actually has a really good battery at 5,000 mAh, also supporting 18-watt fast charging. So in general, if you're looking for a super affordable phone that has a really good battery, you won't go wrong with the TCL 40XL. With a 5,000 mAh battery, you can expect to get really good battery life and longevity. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone pretty much all day, then in that case, a phone like this that has really good battery life will be a great choice. And then in my experience, the charging speed is also pretty decent. Keep in mind, to fully utilize the 18-watt fast charging, you will need an 18-watt charger, which I think this phone comes with like a 5 or 10 watt charger, so definitely keep that in mind. But in my experience, when you do have a good fast charger, the charging speed on this phone is pretty decent. For the software, the TCL 40XL does have Android 13, so definitely great to see there. But keep in mind, when it comes to long-term software support, it is August at this point, so we're getting pretty close to Android 14, and in my experience, TCL phones aren't really known for having a bunch of software updates. So if you were hoping to get Android 14 or beyond that, then you might want to look at something like a Samsung, for example, because in general, while it is definitely possible this phone does end up getting Android 14, with a phone like this, you really never know. So if that is important to you, definitely keep this in mind. Also keep in mind, unfortunately, this phone does not have NFC, and since NFC is the main technology behind Tap and Pay, if you do like to use that feature, you will want to get something else. Now, I feel like this is really too bad because at this point in 2023, in the US at least, which is probably where most people considering this phone are, pretty much every store around here has some kind of tap and pay. So not even having the option to use that feature is definitely disappointing. But on the other hand, I know some people just don't even care at all about using it, so if that's you, then this of course won't be a big deal. But if tap and pay is a feature you do like to use, then you will want to get a different phone because again, the TCL 40XL does not have NFC. Now taking a look at the overall design itself, like pretty much every modern TCL phone, the TCL 40XL does have a really nice look to it. Aside from the water drop notch and the slightly thicker bottom bezel, everything else looks pretty sleek and modern. On the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the right side, we got the power key, which again, this is also the fingerprint scanner. Volume down, volume up. On the top, we got the noise cancelling microphone and the speaker. I haven't actually tested the audio or anything, but it looks like the phone does have stereo audio. That is pretty cool. On the bottom, we got a headphone jack, the main microphone, USB-C port, and the main speaker. Then on the back, we got the camera module, flash, and the TCL branding. The back has a nice matte material, pretty common actually. I feel like every TCL phone has the same material, but despite not feeling really premium per se, the build quality is pretty good overall, and the phone does have a decent amount of weight to it. And in case you're wondering, I did just check, so yeah, this phone does have stereo audio, and in case you don't know what that means, basically when you're doing something like watching a video, listening to music, stuff like that, sound will come out of both the main speaker and the top speaker right here. Usually it's the earpiece, but as you can see, TCL actually put a second speaker here, so definitely really cool. When you compare it to pretty much every other non-TCL phone in this price range, I want to say the vast majority of them don't have stereo audio, which in my opinion, if you're consuming content without headphones or an external speaker, stereo audio is really a must-have. I mean, it really doesn't sound very good without it. But to give you an idea of what the audio sounds like, I'm gonna play you a quick sample.
I can't take it anymore. My mind's about to go to war.
So as you can see, when I cover the main speaker, you can still hear it pretty clearly.
like I am close to reaching out.
So I don't know if you could really tell that well through this video, but I will say for what it is, the actual audio quality of the speaker itself is definitely good. So on one hand, I know a lot of people consume content without ever actually using the phone speaker, but having stereo audio and just a good quality speaker in general definitely gives it some versatility. So if that is important to you, then I do think you will be happy with this phone. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the TCL 40 XL. In general, it's not really necessarily anything super special. I feel like overall for what it is, the general specs and features are pretty standard. It's not like it's super fast or has an amazing display or a super good camera or anything like that. Again, I haven't actually personally used the camera yet, but it is missing an ultra wide camera, which was a little disappointing. But again, I feel like in general, compared to other phones like this, despite not really standing out that much, I do think this phone is a pretty solid option. One thing about it that is particularly impressive is, again, it does have a ton of storage. Again, this phone in my hand does have 256 gigabytes, but even if you get the one with 128, I mean, again, this phone is going for around $118 factory unlocked. So for that price, I would say the storage is pretty impressive. And again, I do think the stereo audio is pretty cool too. So in general, if you're looking for a super affordable phone and you don't necessarily need the best performance or the best display, but you do want something that's decent for consuming content and you want a good amount of storage too, I do think this phone is worth considering. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about the phone, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Cleepus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.